welcome to Barbara Holms.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome you to tonight's presentation. This is the first webinar that I have ever done. Might be the last after tonight. But I do appreciate your attendance, and I hope that the material that I present tonight will be helpful to you. Before I begin tonight's presentation, I'd like to see by the raising of your hands, how many of you feel like you're novices in beginning the research for your German ancestors? And how many of you feel like, that looked like most of the audience, how many of you feel like you've been working at it and hit a lot of brick walls? Okay, well hopefully tonight I'm going to give you 5 steps that it's been my experience that if you follow through on these 5 steps that they go a long way to breaking down those brick walls. And none of these steps are unique. They're probably things that you've heard, but I hope that by reminding you of these things that it will be helpful to you. I used the word Germanic in the title of this because there were many communities that were scattered across Europe that are not considered part of modern-day Germany. They were in Eastern Europe. They were over as far as Russia and in Poland, and the inhabitants spoke German, they wrote in German, they considered themselves German even if they didn't live within the boundary that we think of as Germany today. Oh, I have to turn this on, sorry. There we go. Okay, to successfully find your ancestors, you need 3 things. You need the correct surname, you need the date and a date of an event in your ancestor's life, and you need a location. And the location, of course, is the hardest thing to find, usually. So before we get to the 5 steps, I want to talk and make you aware of issues that have to do with names, dates, and locations when you're dealing with German records. The first one is, and I'm sure a lot of you understand this, that many of the immigrants anglicized their name or even shortened them when they came here. For example, the old German name might have been Gur, and it was spelled G-U-H-R, but it was anglicized to G-E-R-R. Or in my case, one of the ancestors that I was working on, the family name was Falkenhagen, but the brother decided to shorten it to Hagen because he decided, I guess, it was too long. So many immigrants also may have changed their name to an English equivalent. For instance, the name Zimmermann in German, that German word means carpenter. And the word Klein is the German word for what we say little. So you also ought to be aware that you may have some situations where their surname is different from what you thought. Last of all, some surnames reflect a place of residence, especially in Westphalia. I was researching in some German parish records, and I came upon a family whose last name was Bockheim, and they were supposedly from Bockheim, but the map showed no town in the general vicinity with the name Bockheim. I had to actually go to a native German who helped me discover that Bockheim was a large farm in that area. And so sometimes the residents there took on the last name as a farm. Date issues. This little snapshot you see of Caspar Goike comes from an immigration, and that's spelled with an E, an immigration index for Westphalia. Now, when I first found this, it told me that his birth was 12/6/1823, so I wrote it down as December 6, 1823. He was from Ertingen, which was very valuable for me because I didn't know where his birthplace was, and he was headed to Zell, South Dakota, where he did end up. But what I came to find out later, that his real birth date was the 12th of June, 1823. That Germans write their dates as day, month, and year with periods in between. Another odd thing you might run into when you get to the German records is you might find a record that indicates that the month was 7 BER or 8 BER. And you think, well, but the 7th month is July, and it doesn't end in BER. Well, the early Roman calendar started on March 1st and had 10 months. But it wasn't a real accurate calendar because it was based on a lunar system. When Julius Caesar came to power in about 46 AD, BC, I don't know. Anyway, he changed the calendar and it began with January 1st. But because of pagan celebrations associated with January 1st, there was a lot of medieval Europe that still insisted upon starting the new year in March. And therefore, the 7th month was September, and the 8th month was October. So don't let that confuse you if you find that. This is a map of the Germanic states of about 1815. The reason why I included it is because most people don't realize that Germany was not a united country until 1871, which was almost 100 years after the United States. It was made up of a bunch of fragmented, independent little kingdoms or states that govern themselves. I want you to notice this area right here. This area is called Schleswig-Holstein. It's right below Denmark. It goes over time. Sometimes the Danes controlled it. Sometimes the Germans controlled it. You can see that Prussia was coming into its heyday. It extended clear out into Poland and later even into Russia. When I first started doing census records, I discovered that people would put down as their place of birth Bavaria or Baden and Württemberg. And I think, oh, that was really nice of them to tell me which province they were from. No, those weren't provinces then. Those were countries. And so when they say they were from Bavaria, they were from the country of what they thought of as Bavaria. So being familiar with both the geographical and the history of a country is awfully important too. Now, as I may have mentioned, there is no central repository for finding parish records or civil, what we call vital registers. Most vital registers in Germany were started in 1876. So that's kind of late. A lot of our immigrants were already over here in America by then. And so in order to locate the parish or the civil registers, you really have got to know that ancestral home. Because if there are no films for that place, you're going to have to contact the Burgermeister, who's the mayor, and find out where the records for your town are kept. Now, one of the other issues you need to be aware of is that there may be more than one town with the same name. And so you always need to check for that. For instance, did you know that there's more than one Frankfurter? Did I say that right? Frankfurt. Frankfurt, Germany. There's Frankfurt am Main, which is on the Main River and the one that we normally think of. But there's also a Frankfurt a little further on the east that's on the Oder River. And so this is a map that we have in the library. The very front page has been laminated. If you see these red, right here, these red numbers, they refer to the map pages. And you can barely see some of these green lines. These green lines are showing you where the modern day provinces are in Germany. So you can correctly identify where your town is. So you always want to make sure that there isn't more than one town with the same name, because it's possible you could be looking, have the right town name, but be looking in the wrong area. This is a picture of the table that's where the atlases are, and that map is kept down in the third shelf down, so if you need to find it, that's where you can find it. Okay, another problem also associated with location is that a lot of towns sometimes picked up a prefix to the main name of the town. prefixes that meant large, small, north, south, east, west, under, behind, new. And if you do have one of those, be sure, and you can't find the town under that name, drop the prefix and look for the town under the main name. I ran onto a town in Luxembourg. The record said that it was from P-E-T-T-I, no Bressart. Well, I couldn't find a P-E-T-T-I, no Bressart. I could only find a no Bressart. Well, it was the French, for the P-E-T-T-I means little. And so when I dropped that, then I could find the records. So we're going to talk about the 5 steps now. The first step is to search FamilySearch.com and Ancestry.com to make sure that nobody else has already done the research. Now you might think that that's too easy of a step. But just last week, one of my supervisors came to me and he said, I have this German line on my wife's side and I'd really like to know if you could kind of help me. And he said they came through Galveston and settled in Texas. And I said, okay, well, give me what information you got. Let's look at it. And so he gave me the name. It was Martin Schmid, and gave me the dates. I plugged it into Ancestry, and up popped a public tree that went 4 generations back into Germany, and it had names and dates. And when you've got names and dates, then it's pretty legit. There is a film that we can order down from Salt Lake to double check it to make sure. But he goes, that never happens to me. And I go, well, it's your lucky day. So remember that people are adding new information to these sites every day. And so you want to be continually checking back to make sure that something new hasn't been added. Well, some of you may be discouraged and think, but even if I do find that home place, I don't know how to read German. So what am I to do? Well, what you may not understand is that FamilySearch.org has 50 collections of German records that have already been extracted into English. Included in those are 37.7 million births. There are 8.5 million extracted marriages and 3.5 million extracted deaths. You don't need to know German to be able to use those records. You only need to be able to plug in the name and the dates and see if you can get a match. Okay? Now, for those of you who might not be familiar with how to do that on FamilySearch.org, I'm going to run through that process with you for a minute. So if you come to FamilySearch.org, you will see at the top of the screen what looks like what we have right there. But if you scroll down to the bottom of that page, you will see this world map. And right there in the middle, highlighted in green, it says Continental Europe. And that's where you want to click. And when you click on that, it will take you to a list of countries. You can see them all listed there on the left-hand side. And next to the country, there's a number. And that number tells you how many collections of records they have for that country. So in this case, you can see that they have 50 collections for Germany. And if you were to click on Germany, it will take you to this next page. This is just a portion of the German collections. But you can see highlighted at the top, it says Germany deaths and burials. And there's the 3.57 million that they've extracted. And down below at the bottom is the Germany births, where there's 37.7 million extracted records. And you would click on that, and then it would give you the option to put in the names and dates to see if you could find a match. All right, step 2 are your passenger lists. The Germans predominantly immigrated from 3 ports, Hamburg, Bremen, and Rotterdam in the Netherlands. And we're going to talk a little bit more about why these passenger lists are important. There are 3 major waves of German immigrants. Actually, I've identified, I think there's a 4th one that came into Texas and came up the Mississippi through Galveston or St. Louis. But we're going to talk about 3 of them tonight. The first wave went from 1683 to 1773. These immigrants came from the Palatinate or the Falls area, the Rhineland Falls area. and we'll talk about those in just a second. The second wave is where I suspect most of your ancestors came, was in the area between 1820 and 1870. Notice that immigration dropped off when we were having a war. So if we were in the middle of the Revolutionary War or the War of 1812, there weren't a lot of immigrants coming over. During 1820 to 1870, there was a big push because there was economic hardship and a lot of crop failure during that time. But then they stopped again when we were in the middle of the Civil War. Okay, and then the third wave came from Russia. They primarily settled in Nebraska and the Dakotas. If your ancestor falls in this area, make sure that you go to the internet site odessa3.org. We're going to talk a little bit about that wave too. So this first wave of German immigrants, they came, the very first German settlement was in 1683, and they came because William Penn offered them free land to anybody who was religiously persecuted. The Germans had just gone through a time period of a 30-year war in which they lost a third of their population. And their lands were devastated because the armies, as they came through, they had to have a way to eat, so they would take whatever they could find. And so these people in the Rhineland Falls area wanted out, and understandably so. Queen Anne also offered them asylum in England, but all of a sudden she had 7,000 refugees and no place to really put them, so she sent them over to America. And these Germans came as indentured servants. They settled primarily in Pennsylvania and New York, and the way that they paid back their ship passage was they produced tar and pitch for the Royal Navy of England. If you have ancestors who came during this time period, we have 3 books in the library that have to do specifically with those who came over during that time period. And I'd be happy to help you find them. There are reference numbers up there for those books. Now the second wave, as I told you, that's probably the wave where most of yours came through. They came in 1820, and they came because of religious persecution, crop failure, economic hardship. Now the third wave took place about 1873, but the history actually starts back 100 years before that. Catherine the Great was a German. She married a Russian Tsar. And they had cleared some of their lands from some marauding Turks and people that were a real pain to them. And they offered that land to Germans to settle. And they offered that they would give them free land, they could have freedom of religion, they could self-govern themselves, and they wouldn't have to do any military service. So a lot of the people who had been devastated in Württemberg and Baden area did decide to take Catherine up on her offer, and they moved to Russia. And they settled all along the Volga River. They settled 104 different settlements. And these settlements would only be one type of religion. So you would have the Catholics in one town, and you'd have the Protestants or the Lutherans in another town. And they didn't ever mix, okay? Well, after 100 years of having this good situation, the Russians decided to revoke. Yes?
I was going to ask you, you need to repeat the question, but what about the Jewish people?
Okay. Brother Molyneux has asked me, what about the Jewish people? I do believe that there might have been some Jewish settlements along there. But I don't know that for sure because my research hasn't taken me into that area. And they would also be in their own village. They wouldn't have mixed. Okay, so in 1873, the Russians revoked their manifesto and decided that these German settlements were going to have to serve military service. And at that point, a lot of them picked up and said, no, I think we'll go to America. We've got, here, there's free land there. So, back to the passenger list. Hamburg passenger lists are your most valuable. And the reason why they're the most valuable is because they list on the passenger list the last place of residence. And that might be where your ancestor was from. You can find these passenger lists on Ancestry, and but if your ancestor didn't come on the passenger list, then there's the Bremen passenger list. Unfortunately, not a lot of those have survived. We have 44,000 names from the Bremen passenger list. They do not list the last place of residence there. They are helpful in identifying when your ancestor came into this country and who they may have come with, if you can find them on those passenger lists. Those can be found on the website of FamilySearch.org and also on Ancestry.com. Another place to find passenger lists is in Germans to America. Now, I believe that that has been digitized and that that's on Ancestry.com. But if you don't have access to Ancestry, you can come to the library where we have it, where you can access it for free. Or we also have the volumes of Germans to America. There's probably about 40 volumes. It covers the time period of 1840 to 1897. You'll want to look on either side of the year of what you think your immigrant came. The 1840 volumes will be after the 1897 because those were actually put together after the initial set of volumes. One index that you may not have paid attention to is the Württemberg Immigration Index. It has also been digitized. It's on Ancestry.com. It's made up of 7 volumes. We have all 7 volumes at the library. The reason why this index is important is it doesn't just index those who came to America. It indexes a lot of those who went to Eastern European countries and to Russia. And as a consequence, you might be able to find them there and then trace them to Russia and then later to America. The last one that I want to mention is if your ancestors are from Westphalia, which is the Falls area or the Palatinate area, you might want to check the internet site westphaliaimmigration.de because that also lists immigrants and it does list their home birthplace. Now, step 3. You want to determine the year of immigration so that you'll know when to begin looking for records here in the United States that can lead you back to your homeland. You will want to find clues on vital records, on naturalization records found here in the United States. So you check the 1900 or 1910 census. Those censuses ask for the year of immigration. If your ancestor wasn't here by then, you can also check city directories to see when he shows up. That will give you a clue as to when he immigrated. And last of all, if you are looking for naturalization records, the record that you want is the very first record they had to file, which was called the Declaration of Intention. It was usually filed in their county of residence. On that Declaration of Intention, it listed their birthplace. It asked for the birthplace, and so that's the one. I haven't had a lot of success in finding naturalization records, but if you can find one and get your hands on it, it's a gold mine. Now, we do have a book on our reference wall in the library. It's called Guide to Naturalization Records of the United States. It's by Christina K. Schaefer. And in this book, it takes every state, breaks them down by county, and maybe even some of the larger cities, and it will give you a film number that's associated with the naturalization records for that area that have been filmed. And so if you find your area and you think there's a good chance that you can find those naturalization records, you can send for the film and have it brought down. Now, if you've never brought down a film, it's about $7.50 for 3 months to have it. If you want to keep the film down permanently, you can pay $18.50, I think it is. So anyway, that's another option for finding naturalization records. Step 4, need to have a familiarity with both the history and the geographical areas of Germany. This is a map of Prussia in 1871. Look how much Prussia has expanded. It's now clear out to the far east, and it's taken over a lot of the smaller areas. Notice, though, that Bavaria, let's see, right down here, where's my pointer? Oh, I have to hold it. Okay, Bavaria down here never became part of Prussia. It stayed its own country. This area right here, in this to the west of Baden, is called Alsace-Lorraine. It is now controlled by France, but it was originally part of Germany, and so, or of German settlements. So be aware that those records might be found in France. Okay, Baden and Württemberg also remained independent. Now they form one province in modern-day Germany. So here's a map of modern-day Germany. There are 13 provinces. There are 3 independent cities. Just like our Washington, D.C. is not part of any real state, the same thing exists for Berlin, Hamburg, and Bremen. And so that just gives you an idea of where some of these areas are. Now, if your ancestors came from Pommern, East or West Prussia, which is now modern-day Poland or Russia, you will want to use that red book called Mueller's. It's found in our Atlas reference section over by the maps. And the reason why it's valuable is if you know the old German town, but you don't know the modern-day Polish town, it will tell you what the modern-day Polish town's name is. And therefore, then if we don't have films, you can then use that modern-day town's name to write to their mayor and find out if they have records. There is a very good help start for Poland under FamilySearch.org. It even has a letter that's all translated into Polish already for you. All you have to do is basically fill in the blanks with your ancestors' names and dates and pull off an address off the internet. Now, step 5 is probably my most favorite step next to step 1. And that is, it's very important to build out the extended family group sheet as much as possible, because it is not unlikely that you can do all this research on your direct ancestor and never find that homeland. But if you have siblings and you start researching them, there's a good chance that you will find the homeland. And we are going to go through an actual research project of mine where that's exactly what happened. Use obituaries. If you can get your hands on a copy of them, they're invaluable as far as information. And also, don't be afraid to use surname searches in the general locality. I was once researching the name Goika. It was in South Dakota. I had Googled that name and found that a woman had submitted a pedigree chart with that name on it to some very small genealogical group that I'd never heard of. Well, because there aren't a lot of people in South Dakota, I was able to figure out what her address was and write her. Well, this is one of those things where you feel like you get a little divine providence, because lo and behold, I got the family genealogist. And she sent me a packet that had a 1/4 inch thick, and everybody there is interrelated because they all intermarried each other because they're all German. And she was valuable. She was invaluable, you know. And it was because I was willing to go outside my comfort zone and send a letter. I mean, what's the most they can do? Tell you no, I don't know anything, you know. So now we're going to talk about a real live example. These are ancestors from my daughter-in-law, who is totally Germanic on her pedigree line. Notice, though, that John P. Jepson doesn't sound like a German name. It sounds like a Scandinavian name. His wife was Antonia Falkenhagen. So how does a Dane marry a German? Well, it turns out that John P. Jepson was from Schleswig-Holstein, that area that went back and forth between Germany and Denmark. And sure enough, he probably knew a little German. So this is what I knew about John and Antonia. I knew their birth dates. I knew the years that they had immigrated in and come into America, but I had also found Antonia on Bremen passenger lists. She came alone as far as I could tell. She was 19, so I had no siblings for her. I never could identify which record John P. Jepson came on or which ship, and so I had no siblings for him either. They married here in the United States. They had 5 children in Minnesota before they finally moved to South Dakota. So these were the things I needed to find: their birthplaces, whether they had siblings, and their parents. So the first thing I did was I tried to locate the marriage record. I found their marriage license, and I was hoping that it would have some parents' names on it. It didn't, so that was a bust. So then I sent next for the death certificates. This is a copy of Antonia's death certificate. It was filled out by her son. It listed her birthplace as Germany. That's not very helpful. It listed her father as Joe Hagen. I thought that that information was not very reliable. I was pretty sure that her maiden name was Falkenhagen, because that's what it was on her marriage certificate. And Joe is not a German name. It might be Joseph, but and it had no mother listed. So again, another bust. Well, about this time period, I'm thinking, well, I've done all the places that I know of where to search right now, because I don't have any siblings that I can search for. Well, one night, my daughter-in-law walks into the house, and she has a book on John P. Jepson and Antonia Falkenhagen that I didn't know existed. And this was another one of those incidences where I felt like there was a little divine providence coming in. This book included obituaries, and this is a cutout piece of the obituary for John Jepson. Notice it says, Mr. Jepson is survived by his devoted wife and 4 sons, together with 2 brothers, Peter Jepson of Jackson, Minnesota, and Sam Jepson of San Antonio, Texas, and 1 sister, Mrs. R.J. Rasmussen of Gibson City, Illinois. Right off the bat, from that obituary, I knew that he had 3 siblings. They had immigrated to the United States, and now with the census records, I could go back and try and build those families out, which is what I did. And lo and behold, as I was researching the second brother, Sam, whose real name was Soren, I found his enlistment record. It was on Ancestry.com, and in the enlistment record, he listed the birthplace, which was Osterlinne. And sure enough, when we went to the Danish records, there was the family. The entire family was there, and we were able to confirm that that was truly the family place. Now, what about Antonia? Okay, so here, her obituary said that she was born in Helfstein, Germany. And the book also said, though, that her brother was born in a town called Flittenstein. So I was pretty sure that when I found that hometown, it was going to have Stein on the end. But when I checked the maps for both of those places, it was another bust. There was no such place, either of them. But the book also told me that Antonia had 3 siblings who'd immigrated. She had an older sister named Marie, who married a Matthias Fritz. They married in Germany, so before they immigrated, and they had their first child. So that was a good clue, because now I can reverse the process and go back to FamilySearch.org and check the extracted records to see if there's anybody that matches that. It also told me that she had a sister, Suzanne, and a brother, Joseph, who later changed his name to Hagen. Well, as I start this process over again, now I'm going back to step 1, which is to, oh, and I forgot to tell you that in 1920, Joseph said that he was born in West Prussia. Okay, so that's another clue as to which province I should be looking for this town. So as I start the process over and I'm looking in the extracted records, sure enough, I luck out. I find a Marie Falkenhagen who marries a Matthias Fritz on the 11th of December in 1876 in Flirtenstein, West Prussia. Notice how close Flirtenstein is to the town name that was given in the family book by the brother, Flittenstein. Okay? And it tells me, and this was the right time period, this was the right place, the area of the country, so I'm thinking, okay, this might be a match. The parents' names were given. It was given as Andreas Falkenhagen and Suzanne Loper. Well, Suzanne was one of Antonia's sister's names. That's another good strong clue. I'm thinking, okay, things are looking good. I go back, I do some more research now that I've got siblings to look for, and I discover that Suzanne is already in FamilySearch's system, and her birthplace is listed as Flirtenstein. So I have found the family home. It's over there in West Prussia. It's just a little bit south of Gdansk. I don't know whether I can show you, but it's right about there. So it's now in Poland. So that's where my next research is going to take me, is into Poland area. Okay? But, well, you say, okay, so now I know where they came from. How do I find out if there's any films for those areas? Well, Salt Lake has, the Salt Lake Genealogical Library has filmed a lot of things. And this is how you would find out if they have any films. You go to FamilySearch.org, you pick search, and then when that comes up, you pick catalog. And then you want to come down here and pick previous version instead of the beta version. Pick the previous version, and it will take you to a place search. So you see on the far right-hand side where it says place search? That's where you want to click, where you're going to fill in the name of the town as you know it. So I've given you an example right here. I typed in Flirtenstein. I didn't type in West Prussia. I didn't type anything else in. If there's more than one town by that same name, even if it's in England, it will come up and it will show you any records, and you can pick on the one you want from there. Yes?
Comment from the internet, as you're describing maps, they can't see anything. We're going to have to describe where on the map. They can see your map, but they can't see what.
Okay.
But just kind of describe the map.
Okay. Oh, all right. Okay. Thank you. All right. So Flirtenstein had some church records and a civil registration, which is what we would think of as a census. This is a copy of that. When I clicked on the civil registration, a copy of that civil registration record, you see in the far right-hand corner where it says View Film Notes. Whoops. Oh, whoa. I just blew it. How do I go back? Should I go over there and fix it? Start back right at the beginning? Okay. I can just go through this really quick. Okay, this is where we were. All right, notice in the far right-hand corner it says View Film Notes. If you click on that, it will tell you, it will give you the number of the film. Notice down here is the Polish name of the town. So Flirtenstein is no longer called Flirtenstein in Poland. It's called Kokzala, I guess is how you say it. Anyway, I happen to know that because I used Mueller's to figure that out. So, that gives you an idea of how to order down a film. Now I have one last slide, and before I go to that slide, I wanted to share with you a story. It comes from this book that I picked up. I love to pick up storybooks that have beautiful artwork in it, and this was one of them. And it's a story of a girl named Jessie. And it says, when Jessie came across the sea. So the story starts out, it doesn't tell us where. We just know that she and her grandmother live across the sea. I'm going to read you a couple of the pages in here, and just tell you the story. It goes, once in a poor village far from here, there was a very small house with a slanting roof, and inside were 2 chairs, 2 narrow beds, and a table with fine lace cloth. A pot-bellied stove warmed the place in winter and warmed the thin soup. Jessie lived in that house with grandmother. They had 1 skinny cow, Miss Minnie, and a patch of garden. Carrots came up here and there, and sometimes a potato. Long ago, when Jessie was a baby, her parents had died, and Jessie had kept her mother's wedding ring. And though she'd kept it in a tiny silver box with tiny lace lining, and from time to time she tried it on. In the morning, when the village boys went to the rabbi for lessons, Jessie went too. Grandmother insisted. At night after supper, Jessie would read aloud, and she practiced her letters by the light of the fire, and grandmother sewed lace. The coins she earned were dropped into a jar on the table. Now you read, grandmother, and copy my good letters, Jessie liked playing teacher. Me learn to read and write? Grandmother scoffed. Sometime, you never know, you may want to read some things, Jessie said. You may want to write. And grandmother showed Jessie how to make lace, but Jessie stuck herself often. Why do I have to learn, she cried. Sometime you might want to know how so that you can earn some money. Now this becomes very important because grandmother does need to know how to read and write, and Jessie needs to know how to make lace. Well, one day the rabbi calls all the people in the village, and he says that he has a ticket to America that his brother has sent him. But his brother has since died, and the rabbi says, how can I leave my village, my people here? So he says, I'm going to give away my ticket to America to one of you. And throughout the night, all the villagers come to the rabbi and tell him why they should be the one to get the ticket to go to America. And he says to himself, how they boast and brag, he thought. Tonight I shall seek guidance from the Almighty. He told the villagers, you go home, tomorrow I will choose. Well, the next day he shows up at Grandma's and Jessie's house. And they didn't even want to go to America. And he says, I have decided that Jessie will go to America. My brother's widow has a dress shop in New York City. Her name is Kay, and Jessie can help her with the sewing, and she will be a comfort to the good lady. Jessie's hands started to shake. America, so far away from grandmother? She bit her lip, for she must not cry in front of the rabbi. Don't make me go, she thought. You know best, grandmother spoke quietly to the rabbi. But oh, how her heart was breaking. Let's see. Dear Jessie, alone on a ship to America. Grandmother's heart said one thing, but her head said that Jessie must go. So Jessie does go to America, and she uses all of the money that she makes sewing lace to save for grandmother a ticket. And the rest of the story continues, and she develops a friendship and later a love for a young man that was on the ship. And finally she has enough money to send for her grandmother. And so this is the end of the story. It goes, days passed and weeks, and Jessie sewed lace early and late. Months went by, and Jessie sewed, and then one day the jar was filled with coins. She brought it to a man who sold tickets to America. I need a ticket for grandmother, she said. Every day Jessie rushed down 3 flights of stairs to the mailbox. The letter came finally on a breezy day. The handwriting was shaky, but Jessie knew grandmother had written every word of it herself. Dear Jessie, I sewed the ticket to the lining of my coat. I say goodbye to this village. The rabbi is taking Miss Minnie. Remember, Miss Minnie's the cow. Your loving grandmother. Well, on the day that grandmother arrives, it says, the morning her ship arrived in New York, it rained so hard there was no telling where the sky met the sea. Grandmother was older than Jessie remembered and much more frail. They held each other for a long time. "I brought something for you," Grandmother whispered from across the sea. With that, she slipped Jessie's mother's wedding ring onto Jessie's hand, and then they went home, for there was going to be a wedding. I just want to say that yes?
Question from the internet. It says, many of my ancestors all have the same names for multiple generations, which makes it difficult to continue building out. Any ideas on how to overcome these types of roadblocks?
Oh, okay. The question from the internet was that many of their ancestors had the same name, so it made it very difficult to build out the pedigree charts because the names get confused. And they wanted to know if I had any ideas on how to overcome that roadblock. That's a difficult situation. I know you run into it a lot with English records. I haven't run into it so much with German records. One thing that might be helpful to know is that Germans go traditionally by their middle name. Their first given name is given to them by the priest. And the second name is the name that the family gives them, and that's the name that they usually go by. So you might have several Johans in the family because that's what the priest gave as the first name, but then it'll be like Johann Casper or Johann Adam or, some of those. So Germans also have a very set limit, even today, of what names they consider acceptable. You have to submit your name to the authorities, and they decide whether you can name your child that or not. I know that they no longer allow the name Adolf. And there are certain other ones that they don't want the child to grow up feeling embarrassed, and so there are certain names that they just don't allow you to use. So you do have a limited number of names, and your best bet would probably be to try and track names through their entire life, from their marriages to their kids being born, and try and identify them. If you can't identify them by the male, identify them by the wives. And that's the best that I can suggest. So, well, Otto and Hermann are traditional German names, and guys, that doesn't surprise me. Does she know the area that that she's dealing with? Which part of Germany? She's typing. Okay. Does she know the time period that they came into the United States? Okay. All right. She'll probably, it sounds like she's got a brick wall there, but hopefully, yes, do we have another question?
Yeah. My grandfather came over from Germany with that Benelux name. I know there's 3 towns that are named villages, named is there a relationship then as far as you're more apt to come from those 3 towns as opposed to another place in Germany?
No. It's like oh, I'm sorry. Yes, the question was, one of the men in the audience said that he has an ancestor that came from Germany. They know the town name, but there are 3 towns with that same name. And so he was wondering if there was any relationship between the names of the towns, and if you had a choice of how to pick the one that it was in. And just like there's a Miami, Florida, there's a Miami, Arizona. And the 2 aren't really related. What you have to do in a situation like that is you have to order the films down and go to that time period where you have a birth date or a marriage date and then try and see if you can find the rest of the family, or you can find the birth date for that person, and then you'll know you got the right record, the right town. Yes? Okay. They came, okay, let me repeat the question for those that are on the internet. Correct me if I don't say if I say something inaccurately. Your like third great grandfather came in, they came in from that area called Alsace-Lorraine that was there on the western side of Germany that's now under French control. And they came about 1933? Oh, 1833. To the port of New York. Okay, and do you have the town name? Okay, so was the passenger list a Hamburg passenger list or was it a Bremen passenger list? Okay, because if it's a Hamburg passenger list, go back and look for the last place of residence on it, because it will list that. If it's from Bremen, then you're going to have to find that ancestral home in records here in the United States. I would look under German records for the name of the town for 1833 for Alsace-Lorraine, because it was under German control. If Salt Lake doesn't have any copies of films for that area, then you're going to have to write to France. And we do have Brother Molyneux who knows French and can help you in that prospect. Okay? Any other questions? Yes? Okay, the question was, is there someone locally who can translate the German? The answer is yes. We have a volunteer who works at the library. Her name is Angie Hetherington. She grew up and learned the old Gothic handwriting in elementary school. And then in 1946, I think it was, when Hitler came to power, he stopped them from using the Gothic handwriting anymore. I can do a fair job of reading it. When I first started into German records, I thought, because my husband had lived 2 years in Germany and knew German really well, I thought, all I have to do is find the record and give it to him and he can read it. Well, he can speak German, but he can't read the writing. And so I've had to teach myself how to read it, and I can do a fair job. I started by just using Google Translate. I started writing like months, numbers, relationships like son, daughter in English, and having Google translate it for me. So that, and so I basically created my own word list of German words. And then I would go to a German record and I would start picking out what I could. But there are some specific letters that are written very uniquely. And for instance, the letter S, it can be written 4 different ways, depending upon where it is in the sentence or in the words, you know. And so you have to be aware of those things and watch for it. The biggest thing that's a real hang-up for a lot of people is what looks like a small cursive N is really their E. So every time you see what would to us look like a small N, it's really an E. And so, I mean, and I was even going to ask you tonight whether there was an interest in having a class on how to read those German records, because I think that Sister Hetherington and I could put together a class that would give you some help in reading those German records if you wanted. But she's the expert, and she's only going to be here till the end of December. So you need to come in and catch her before then. She works on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Okay, so the last of my slides is that I have always been touched by the words that are on the base of the Statue of Liberty. In a poem that Emma Lazarus wrote, she called the statue the mother of exiles, and she wrote, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore, send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." All of our ancestors have a story, and we owe it to those ancestors because of the courage and the sacrifices that they made to come to this country to try and find their records and to tell that story and preserve it. I want you to know that I believe that you will receive divine help as you search for those records, because these people want you to find them. And even though I know that the 5 steps that I went over tonight are not unique or special, my experience has been that if you diligently apply yourself, that you will receive the breakthroughs that you need to be able to go back into Germany. And I want to wish you luck in that prospect. Thank you.